All right, today we're going to dive into something we use every single day but almost never think about: money. And let me tell you, its story is way weirder than you think. It's not just about coins and dollar bills, it's really a story about technology, power, and this one critical thing that holds the whole system together: trust. And to really get what that means, I've got a little puzzle for you.
So think about this for a second. What could a giant stone wheel, like car-sized, a bag of salt, and a string of pretty little shells possibly have in common? I know, it sounds like a weird riddle, but the answer is something that literally shaped human history.
Believe it or not, they were all forms of money. Yep, salt, shells, massive stones. It's kind of wild, right? But what it shows us is the most fundamental, mind-blowing truth about money. It can be anything. Literally anything, as long as we, a community, a society, all agree that it has value. That shared belief, that's the magic ingredient. It's the engine that makes our entire financial world go round.
And that brings us to the big idea for this whole explainer. It's this: money is probably the most successful shared illusion in all of human history. Think about it. It's just a story that we all collectively agree to believe in. Its power isn't in the paper or the metal, it's in our shared trust. So here's the game plan for our trip through time. We're going to start with the basics, from barter to beads. Then we'll get into the Coinage Revolution. After that, we'll see how a simple promise on paper changed everything. Then we'll tackle money by government decree, the stuff in our wallets. We'll move on to the digital disruption. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about the future of trust itself. Okay, so let's rewind all the way back. Imagine a world with no money. It sounds simple, but it's actually a huge pain. Let's say you're a farmer and you've got a bunch of chickens, but what you really need is a new pair of shoes. Well, you'd have to find a shoemaker who, right at that very moment, was desperately craving chickens. That's called the double coincidence of wants, and honestly, it's a massive headache. It makes trade super difficult and basically puts a hard ceiling on how much an economy can grow. So what was the first big fix? It was actually pretty brilliant and simple: commodity money. People started using things that were useful on their own, that have what we call intrinsic value. Take salt, for example. It was super valuable for preserving food, so everyone wanted it. Or cattle. You could get milk, do work. Even pretty cowrie shells were used for jewelry. The key here is that these things weren't just symbols. They were actually useful, and that usefulness made them a pretty reliable first attempt at money.
Okay, but let's be real. Lugging around a cow or a giant bag of salt to the market isn't exactly practical. Humanity needed an upgrade. And that's what led to the next huge leap forward: the Coinage Revolution. The big idea was to take something durable, easy to divide, and easy to carry, like metal, and turn it into standardized little pieces. And wow, this one idea, it completely changed the game.
And what's just wild is how fast this idea took off. Around 600 BC, in a kingdom called Lydia, that's modern-day Turkey, they became the first to mint actual coins with a standard weight and purity. It was such a game changer that the idea spread like wildfire. The Greeks perfected it, and before you knew it, massive empires like Rome were using their coin, the denarius, to power trade across pretty much the entire known world. For the very first time, humanity had something like a universal language for value. But, of course, with this awesome new power came a new and pretty sneaky temptation for the people in charge: debasement. Now, this is a really important concept. Rulers figured out, hey, what if we take all these gold and silver coins, melt them down, mix in some cheap stuff like copper, and then make even more coins? The coin still says it's worth the same amount, but the actual precious metal inside, it's been watered down. It was basically the ancient world's version of just printing money out of thin air to pay for armies or build giant palaces. And if you want a perfect example of how dangerous this is, just look at the Roman Denarius. Back in the time of Emperor Nero, it was about 90% pure silver. Solid stuff. But fast forward a couple hundred years, it was down to a measly 0.5%. I mean, it was basically junk metal. And people knew it. This complete collapse of trust led to insane inflation and was a major factor in the eventual downfall of the whole Roman Empire. So coins were great, but they still had a problem. They're heavy. If you're a big-time merchant trying to do business across entire continents, carrying chests full of gold is, well, it's a huge pain and pretty dangerous. So money had to evolve again. It had to become more abstract. It became a promise written on a piece of paper. You'd see merchants leaving their gold with a trusted goldsmith who'd give them a receipt, an IOU for it. Suddenly, trade became lighter, faster,
and a whole lot safer.
And the simple idea of paper receipts led to one of the most powerful and honestly kind of controversial inventions in all of finance: fractional reserve banking. See, the goldsmiths, the early bankers, they had a realization. They noticed that not everybody shows up on the same day to get their gold back. So they thought, wait a minute, we can write more IOUs than the actual gold we have sitting in the vault. They were literally creating new money, not out of metal, but out of trust. And that system, that's the bedrock of all modern banking today. Now, for hundreds of years, that little piece of paper, that IOU, was still tied to something physical. You could, in theory, go and trade it in for a lump of gold. But then, in the 20th century, we took maybe the biggest, most radical leap of faith in the entire history of money. Governments all over the world did something that would have seemed insane to their ancestors. They cut the cord completely. And this is where we enter the age of fiat money. The dollar, the euro, the yen, pretty much every currency you can think of today is fiat money. The word fiat literally comes from Latin, meaning let it be so, or by decree. So a dollar has value for one reason, and one reason only, because the government says it does. And because we as a society trust that government to keep things stable. The value isn't in a vault somewhere, it's entirely in our collective faith in the institution.
So what happens when that trust completely shatters? Well, you get one of the scariest economic stories of all time: Germany after World War I. The government had insane war debts to pay, so they just started printing money, nonstop. Look at these numbers. In 1922, a US dollar cost you about 7,000 German marks. Just 1 year later, by late 1923, that same dollar cost 4.2 trillion marks. People were using wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Your entire life savings could become worthless in a matter of months. It's just a brutal lesson that fiat money is only as strong as the trust people have in it.
And that brings us much closer to home. The 2008 financial crisis was, for a lot of people, another one of those moments where trust just broke. But this time, it wasn't just in one country's government. It was a crisis of faith in the entire global banking system. And it was right in the middle of that chaos, out of those ashes, that a totally new and radical idea about money emerged.
This is so cool. When the mysterious creator of Bitcoin, who we only know as Satoshi Nakamoto, launched the network, they embedded a message in the very first block of transactions. It was a headline from a British newspaper: "Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks." It wasn't just a random piece of data. It was a timestamp, sure, but it was also a mission statement. It was saying loud and clear, the system you trust is failing. Here's something different.
And that something different is cryptocurrency. The absolute core idea, the thing that makes it unlike anything we've talked about so far, is decentralization. There's no king, no government, no central bank in charge. Instead, the whole thing is run by a massive global network of computers that anyone can join.
So how on earth does that work without a bank in the middle? Well, here's the super simplified version. When you want to send a transaction, you just broadcast it out to this giant network. All around the world, computers are competing to verify that your transaction is legit by solving a really hard math puzzle. The winner gets to add your transaction to a long, permanent, public record called the blockchain. So the trust, it's not in a single company or government anymore. The trust is placed in the math and the transparency of the network itself.
And that pretty much brings us right up to today. What a journey, right? We've gone from trading physical objects, actual atoms, to sending pure information, just bits and bytes, across the globe in an instant. But through that entire crazy evolution, there's been one constant theme, one thread tying it all together.
The story of money has always been the story of what we choose to trust. With commodity money, we trusted the usefulness of the thing itself. With coins, we trusted the authority of the king who stamped it. With paper money, we trusted the banker's promise to pay us back. With fiat money, we place our trust in the stability of our government. And now, with crypto, the proposal is to place our trust in something new, the cold, hard logic of math and code. Every step has been a leap to something more abstract.
So here we are, right back where we started, full circle. The technology changes, the form changes, but the underlying principle, it's exactly the same. It doesn't matter if it's a seashell, a gold coin, or a string of digital code. Money is, and has always been, the most successful shared illusion in human history.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. As our technology gets crazier and our world gets more connected, what do you think the next chapter of this story is going to be? What's the next great story, the next shared illusion that we're all going to agree to believe in?